In week 6, we were supposed to get Austin Ekeler and Saquon Barkley back for our fantasy lineups. And then the fantasy gods reached down and said, no, that's way too much. Why don't you give me Kyren Williams, David Montgomery, and you know what? Just so I can laugh a little bit, let me take Christian McCaffrey from you all as well. Hide your kids, hide your wives, most importantly, hide your running backs. With all the injuries and 6 teams on a bye this week, what are we going to do? Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? To say the running back position is kind of a mess right now is really an understatement. We've got 6 teams on a bye. We're dealing with injuries all over the place. We're just trying to find some consistency at the position. And this week is going to be the toughest week yet when it comes to setting our lineup. And hopefully this video, where I cover every matchup for running backs in week 7, will help you out a little bit and set your fantasy lineups for victory. Now, don't forget, like all of our start and sit videos, we do have timestamps in the description down below if you need to jump to any certain portion of the video. But I've got a really quick message from my man Taylor that's got to tell you about the sponsor for this video.
Hey Headliner Nation, it's Taylor back again, and I want to talk to you about our sponsor for today's video, Marine Layer, but something's changed. After a good amount of washes of this denim shirt and this Marine Layer t-shirt, what hasn't changed is the softness and the quality. But what has changed is the exclusive limited time discount code for Headliner Nation. Use code FANTASY15 at checkout at marinelayer.com for 15% off your entire order. This t-shirt has become one of my favorites, and I wear it all the time. I get it, you may be thinking I've got plenty of old t-shirts in the closet that are pretty comfortable. But, you know, those holes in them and the wing stain, not so great. So I want to tell you about Marine Layer's Respun program. It's this super cool thing where they'll send you a t-shirt recycling kit that's prepaid, and you can send in all of those old t-shirts to get $5 per t-shirt credit at marinelayer.com. They'll literally pay you to send in those old t-shirts and turn them into new ones. We can agree that the perfect t-shirt is pretty hard to find, but Marine Layer has us covered. And for a limited time only, don't forget that discount code FANTASY15 at checkout for 15% off your entire purchase at marinelayer.com. Once again, that code is FANTASY15, 15% off your purchase at marinelayer.com. They're saving your closet one t-shirt at a time.
Yo, Taylor, appreciate it, but we've got to jump right into the analysis now. And Thursday Night Football is going to bring a really tough matchup for 2 of our top fantasy performers this week. Jacksonville and New Orleans both rank inside the top 10 for fewest rushing yards allowed this season. And given how dependent we are right now on Travis Etienne and Alvin Kamara to anchor our fantasy lineups, this matchup on Thursday Night Football couldn't come at a worse time. Travis Etienne has back-to-back games with 2 touchdowns apiece. And maybe his ceiling wasn't as high as we would have liked at the beginning of the year, but we have finally saw it the last couple of weeks, and he's put any doubt about him being the top running back in Jacksonville to bed. All but one of Travis Etienne's games this season, he has finished as a top 24 running back, and he's averaging over 17 fantasy points per game. But given this matchup going up against New Orleans, especially if Trevor Lawrence is banged up and not able to play this week, you would think that that would just increase potential volume, but it's also going to offset the fact that New Orleans can just bunch up on the run, and that's not going to be good for Etienne. This week, I've got him in yellow. We're still going to start him, but that ceiling that we've seen the last couple of weeks just will not be here for this matchup. Jacksonville's defense continues to get it done against the run. They have allowed the 3rd fewest rushing yards this season. And they may have given up a few too many passing yards to the running backs last week, but they absolutely stalled Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor on the ground. And they have done that to running backs all season long. This matchup going up against Alvin Kamara, we're hoping for those targets and those receptions. That's going to be his only path to upside this week. Will he give you 30 or 40 rushing yards? Yeah, more than likely. But we're going to need to get 30 or 40 receiving yards out of him and hopefully close to double-digit targets for him to finish anywhere near like a top 5 running back. For me right now, I'm thinking low-end RB1, really at best. The Detroit Lions feel like our fantasy teams right now. It feels like they've got guys dropping on both sides of the ball and key players missing on defense. Now, that hasn't stopped them in terms of winning football games, and we won't go into my Lions right now because this is a fantasy show. But this week at the running back position, we don't know if we're going to get David Montgomery Montgomery or Jahmyr Gibbs back. This is going to be another tough matchup for our fantasy players because Baltimore has allowed the 10th fewest rushing yards this year. Detroit has allowed the fewest rushing yards this year. And we don't even really know who's going to be able to be used in this matchup. As of right now, David Montgomery probably going to be questionable heading into next week. He fell weird on like his ribs and he had to come out of the game, and x-rays ended up being negative, which is great, but will he miss any time this week? Ribs are a thing that he's dealt with in the past while he played for Chicago, and Jahmyr Gibbs has missed each of the last 2 weeks. Really, at this point for Detroit, the only thing that I can tell you all is that you're going to have to tune into the rankings episode on Thursday, because until I know whether either of these guys can go, I don't know if I'm telling you that you have to start Craig Reynolds, or if we can trust Jahmyr Gibbs, or if David Montgomery is going to be a start because of how good he's been this year, but don't expect enough of a ceiling. Just stay tuned for the rest of the week. Now for Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, they're running into the #1 rush defense in football right now. And for Gus Edwards, there's just not much of a ceiling there this week. He still continues to be the RB1. He's seeing the most snaps and he's seeing the most really targets and carries and everything, but Justice Hill is getting a few more looks inside the red zone, which is where I would want to bet my money this week. I'm also wondering if, even though Gus Edwards saw more work in the passing game last week, if Justice Hill doesn't take that over a little bit more going up against Detroit, if he can find himself a few targets and possibly a touchdown, he becomes a flex start. But quite honestly, I want to look elsewhere this week. Josh Jacobs is going to find himself in an interesting position this week because he gets the Chicago Bears, who have allowed the 8th fewest rushing yards on the ground. But if you take a look at the numbers, they're giving up a lot of points to running backs. So how is that? Well, Chicago has allowed the 5th most fantasy points to the running back position, partly because of how well running backs do through the air against them. Chicago has allowed the 4th most receptions, the most receiving yards, and are tied for the most receiving touchdowns to running backs this year, which is great news for Josh Jacobs because of how much he does in the pass game. And not only that, but we're probably not going to see Jimmy Garoppolo this week. So whoever the backup quarterback ends up being, whether it's Brian Hoyer or Aiden O'Connell, they're probably going to be looking to Josh Jacobs quite a bit. Josh Jacobs has a really, really good ceiling this week. If he can get a lot of work in the passing game, this is a guy that's got top 5 running back potential written all over him. Now, Las Vegas is really middle of the road when it comes to stopping the run, but we really don't know who the running back will be for Chicago this week. Khalil Herbert went on IR before last week's game, so a lot of people were getting excited that after holding on to Roschon Johnson all season, that he was finally going to get the ability to take over. But he was dealing with a concussion and he was not active, so it was D'Onta Foreman, who really, in all honesty, had a really poor performance in a matchup that he should have played a lot better in. So if I had to guess, if Roschon Johnson is going to be active this week, Roschon Johnson would be the guy. And if he is active, he will slip into kind of that flex area for my rankings this week. He'll definitely be inside the top 30 given how many buys that we have this week, but I would just be a little bit cautious that we don't really get the ceiling that we would like if D'Onta Foreman continues to see touches right alongside him. Cleveland and Indianapolis just brings a whole lot of question marks in this matchup because we're dealing with 2 backfields that we really don't know how they're going to shake out from week to week right now. So let's start with Cleveland and try to figure out Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt. Now, if you watched my waiver wire video, you heard my small rant about Jerome Ford, and really the guy had done absolutely nothing all day until the final drive of the game where it was extended because a couple of penalties that never should have been called. So Jerome Ford, if he doesn't get those extra touches on that last drive, he doesn't give you any type of a decent performance. Whereas Kareem Hunt gave you a performance inside the top 24 and scored a touchdown. Jerome Ford played 10 more snaps than Kareem Hunt this week, but they ran the same amount of routes out of the backfield, and Ford only had 5 more carries. And again, for a majority of the game, Jerome Ford was largely inefficient compared to Kareem Hunt. It is very probable that we see Kareem Hunt start to take over more and more of a workload in this backfield. Now, I will say this, given the landscape of injuries and bye weeks right now, Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt will both be risky starts for me this week. If you want to flex Jerome Ford or Kareem Hunt, you can do that in this matchup going up against Indianapolis, where they are very up and down on how they stop running backs. I mean, you saw it last week against Travis Etienne. 2 really big runs for touchdowns that made the majority of his day, but outside of that, they really kept him in check for a large portion of it. And that's just how they play. They'll give up big runs from time to time, and other times they'll shut everybody down. So if I had to bet on one guy finishing higher than the other, I will take Kareem Hunt over Jerome Ford this week. Now on the other side, Indianapolis doesn't have a decent matchup. They're getting the top defense in all of football right now that caused fits last week for the San Francisco 49ers. But it does appear that it's finally going to be Jonathan Taylor this week, and Zach Moss will finally move to a backup role. Zach Moss ended up playing 6 more snaps and ran 6 more routes than Jonathan Taylor this past week. But he only saw 1 more target and had 1 less carry than Jonathan Taylor. And really throughout the entire game, it was nearly a 50-50 split. One would play one drive, another one would play another drive. It wasn't until the very end of the game in the 4th quarter that Zach Moss basically took over the majority of the snaps, and that's because Indianapolis was down by 20+ points. So in this matchup, I do expect to see more Jonathan Taylor this week. He's finally worked his way back, and after getting a couple of games under his belt, he should start to see the majority of the workload. Zach Moss is going to end up, he's going to be a pain in our side until Jonathan Taylor has a big game and Indianapolis trusts him fully to be the guy. But I think we're going to still see way too much Zach Moss than what we would like to. If you got to start one of these guys this week, it's Jonathan Taylor. If you have to start Zach Moss, you better just hope he finds the end zone. If you're out there watching right now and you have any ties to the Buffalo Bills, I need you to get me in a room with their offensive play callers, because the way they called this game against the New York Giants last week was absolutely ridiculous. At one point, James Cook was averaging over 7 yards per carry against one of the worst run defenses in all of football, and they continued to just throw the football. James Cook only got 14 rushing attempts this past week. That's ridiculous. Hopefully Buffalo sits down and realizes, hey, we've got to get James Cook more involved, because when we do, things turn out a lot better. Now, Latavius Murray also saw a season high in carries as well this week, and he also played okay for the most part, but there was some critical short yardage situations that Latavius Murray didn't get the job done. And with Damian Harris being carted off with a neck injury, it sounds like Buffalo is taking a look at Leonard Fournette, which would be really weird. But I'm not letting that freak me out about James Cook. He doesn't have the ceiling that we would have hoped for, but he's still a decent bet to go out there and get you anywhere between 7 and 10 fantasy points. And this isn't going to be that hard of a matchup this week either. New England's defense, for as good as it is at times, is very middle of the road when it comes to stopping the run. And if Josh Allen is a little bit banged up, as we heard this morning that he might be a little bit sore with his throwing elbow, we might need to run the football a little bit more this week. And James Cook absolutely can get the job done. Is he a top 10 running back for me this week? No, but top 24 potential is absolutely in the cards. And you know what? Because I believe that James Cook is going to get it done in this matchup, I'm actually going to go higher on his current line over on Underdog of 51.5 rushing yards for this week. If you want to lock that pick'em in along with me and you're not signed up over on Underdog yet, what are you waiting for? Download the app. Make sure you use code word headliners when you create a new account and make a first-time deposit. And not only will Underdog match your deposit up to $100, they're going to give you a special pick'em to play that's almost guaranteed to hit. It was great to see Ramondre Stevenson bounce back last week, and it was even better to see Ramondre Stevenson see a 13% target share in the passing game, his largest of the season. Now, Buffalo's defense is not that great against the run. For a majority of the game going up against the Giants, they did keep keep Saquon Barkley in check. But he had some pretty big runs there in the fourth quarter as the Giants were trying to win that game. And given the fact that he was coming off of an injury, it's not surprising if it took him a few carries to get going and to actually start to loosen up that ankle a little bit. So Rhamondre Stevenson has a really good opportunity to keep it rolling for fantasy owners that have been waiting it out for him. Now, am I willing to go crazy and say, yeah, we're back to top 10 potential and things like that? No, absolutely not. But I do think he has more than enough possibilities of reaching 10 plus fantasy points this week. Given uncertainty at the quarterback position, depending on if it's Malik Cunningham or Bailey Zappi, or if they do end up going back to Mac Jones, you can bet against this Buffalo defense, they're probably going to try to run the football and control the game as much as possible. Rhamondre Stevenson may not be the highest ceiling this week, but I definitely think he brings a pretty decent floor. The Washington Commanders and New York Giants will bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Fellas, it is beard season. No Shave November is almost here. And if you're looking to keep your beard in pristine condition like I do, make sure you head on over to manscaped.com. Check out all of their awesome new beard products. And when you check out, use code word headliners and you're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Finally, after talking about a bunch of matchups that were not good for our running backs, we get a game where Saquon Barkley and Brian Robinson could have big days for our fantasy lineups. The Giants defense currently allows the second most rushing yards in the NFL, and even Washington's defense right now is only ranked 23rd against the run. This is a really good opportunity for both of these running backs to hit a really high ceiling, as long as we don't get too pass happy. But with an injury to Daniel Jones, we'll probably rely on Saquon Barkley in this matchup. And even for Sam Howell, they really tried to stay inside his abilities and not let him get too out of control like he did a few weeks ago. And really offsetting that with the run is a really good game plan for Washington. You can bet both of these running backs will probably be over 20 carries this week. And if that happens, both of them definitely are top 10 options at the position. All right, we are right back to terrible matchups for our running backs. And if you're a Bijan Robinson owner, you're super frustrated over the last couple of weeks of the season because to begin the year, Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier were seeing a pretty identical split on the ground. They were both getting the same amount of touches on the ground while Bijan was really getting worked into the passing game. And slowly over the next few weeks, you saw Bijan Robinson develop all the way up to 80% of the running back touches on the ground. And now all of a sudden we're back to double-digit carries for Tyler Algier. Arthur Smith just doesn't make a whole lot of sense with his game plan right now. So the good thing for Bijan Robinson, though, is he's getting so much work in the passing game that it's still getting him a decent floor. Now, he's not reaching the ceiling that you drafted him for, but he's reaching a safe enough floor that you still have to play him, and you're still not super upset about the numbers. Just take a look at what Bijan Robinson is doing compared to other running backs in the NFL right now. There's not a whole lot of room to complain. Again, I understand the frustrations that he's not reaching the ceiling that you would like, but his floor is super nice right now, given the amount of work he's getting in the passing game. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers allow the 7th fewest rushing yards to the position right now. So Tyler Algier completely out of the question for me this week. And Bijan Robinson is going to be a risky start because his ceiling, I don't think, will be here again this week. The one thing that they are going to have to do, they are going to have to get him a couple of big plays out of the backfield. If that doesn't happen, he's just not going to have the type of upside that we would like. Now, David Montgomery ended up going down with an injury last week, but even before that, Tampa Bay barely allowed 3 rushing yards per attempt for David Montgomery and that stout offensive line for the Detroit Lions. I just can't see Bijan Robinson having a big day on the ground against Tampa Bay. And while Atlanta is ranked 11th against the run right now, they have allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the running back position. And Rachaad White continues to look bad in the backfield. I saw Keyshawn Vaughn getting a little bit more work this week. Now, it wasn't a whole lot, but Rachaad White just isn't doing it. Now, Detroit's defense, number 1 against the run, really stuffed them last week, and we're not able to do a whole lot against them. But Rachaad White needs to be better. And this was a big concern this offseason for me, is that last year, he was not efficient. Even at the end of the season when he took over as the starter for Leonard Fournette, he was not efficient in any way whatsoever. He relies on volume, and given this tough matchup, the volume might not be there for him, and the efficiency sure won't either. This was supposed to be the second straight smash game for Kyren Williams, going up against a Pittsburgh defense that allows the 5th most rushing yards. But unfortunately, like I said at the beginning of the video, the fantasy gods decided to take him away, and then they also took Ronnie Rivers with him for some reason. So if you're wanting to play a decent matchup here, you're going to have to go with rookie Zach Evans, and I don't know if I'm willing to do that. If you are desperate, if you just need somebody this week because you can't fill a lineup, then Zach Evans makes sense. It's a good matchup, and he's going to be one of the only guys getting touches in that backfield this week. But I don't think we want to get too excited about it. Now, if this video comes out prior to your waivers processing and you're still trying to grab somebody, then Zach Evans is not a guy that I would want to use a top priority add-on, because it could end up being just 1 week. The reports on Kyren Williams are that he'll miss this week, but it's not that bad of a sprain and he could be back very soon. So don't use a top priority add on Zach Evans. If you're going to grab him, you're grabbing him just because you need somebody to fill in this week. He is not a long-term option for your fantasy team. Now, the LA Rams, they allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. Najee Harris has been a guy that has just, it feels like his efficiency has just steadily declined over the last couple of games, and Jaylen Warren continues to make a bigger and bigger impact as well. Now that Pittsburgh is coming out of the bye, you have to think that they sat down and really evaluated which running back would give them the best opportunity to win a game. I think it's Jaylen Warren. I think Jaylen Warren and the ability that he possesses in the passing game and how hard he runs is definitely a better fit for this offense than Najee Harris right now. And given that this is a tough matchup for the running back position, we really got to hope that Jaylen Warren ends up being the guy, if Pittsburgh is down to LA on the road, that can get a little bit of looks in the passing game and maybe get you 5 or 6 receptions. I don't really know if I need to take this time to go through a bunch of options for the Arizona Cardinals, given the fact that they're going up against the Seattle Seahawks that allow the 5th fewest rushing yards in football right now. We don't even really know who the running back to own is in Arizona. Last week, everyone got super excited about Emari Demercado and thought he was going to be the guy. And while he did play more snaps and maybe he was utilized a little bit more in the passing game, Keontae Ingram was utilized a lot more on the ground. This is truly a split backfield, and even Damian Williams saw some touches last week as well. So who are we really going to rely on going up against such a tough defense? It really isn't anybody. If you want to throw somebody in, maybe go with Demercado, seeing that he saw more routes run and he saw more targets. The big thing here is how big of a week Kenneth Walker is going to have. The Arizona Cardinals defense is ranked 24th against the run, and they allow the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back position. Kenneth Walker had an okay day last week, scored a touchdown, ran for 70 yards, not super efficient, but still a decent day. And he's far outproducing and outsnapping Zach Charbonnet. I mean, Kenneth Walker was at 90% offensive snaps last week. That's insane for the running back position these days. Given this matchup going up against Arizona and probably no Christian McCaffrey this week, it is not any stretch of the imagination if I were to tell you Kenneth Walker may be my #1 overall running back for week 7. Let's face it, Denver's defense couldn't even stop Jake from eating a bag of hamburgers from White Castle, and Jake doesn't even like White Castle. That's how bad Denver is. So Aaron Jones, even though he's been inactive a majority of the season and had a bad game a couple of weeks ago, this is a really great matchup if he were to return, and it's part of the reason why he's in green and even A.J. Dillon is going to be in yellow, because we're probably still going to see some A.J. Dillon even if Aaron Jones were to come back this week. Now, if Aaron Jones plays, he's got all the upside potential in the world. In the passing game, on the ground, explosive playmaking is definitely going to be in the cards for him this week. Could he be somewhat limited? Absolutely. But even being limited, the efficiency opportunity is going to be here. Now, if for some reason Aaron Jones doesn't play, A.J. Dillon is still in a really, really good spot this week. So he would actually turn to green for me. Once again, I got to mention it. I felt like I've said it 100 times. Given the injuries, And given the buys, we can't be super picky this week. So when your running back is playing the worst defense in the NFL, you might as well start him. Now the Denver running backs are also going to have a decent matchup this week. Right now, Green Bay allows the 5th most rushing yards in the NFL and the 4th most fantasy points to the running back position. For me, I'm going back to Javonte Williams. I know Jaleel McLaughlin was a decent look last week and a guy that we thought might be getting a little bit more work, but Javonte Williams is still the guy, even coming back from being banged up a couple of weeks ago. And given how good this matchup is going to be, Javonte Williams is probably going to see a majority of the touches going into this matchup. This past week, Javonte Williams saw just over 40% of the running back snaps. McLaughlin was just behind him. He was about high 30s, and Samaje Perine, he kind of wrapped up the last few scraps at the running back position. So Javonte Williams clearly still the lead back. Now, where McLaughlin could end up coming into play is for those of you in PPR leagues. Denver, if they were to go down in this game and they get some negative game script, Jaleel McLaughlin is still kind of looked at as the receiving back in this offense right now. So he could definitely see a few targets and a negative game script. But if for some reason they can keep it close, Javonte Williams, even though he is a risk, he definitely is a guy that I feel like he has a nice safe floor this week of right around 10 fantasy points. We finally got Austin Ekeler back this past week, and he had a tough matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. Now in his second week back, he's got the Kansas City Chiefs, who are also really tough against running backs right now. Kansas City's defense is ranked 12th against the run, but they have allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. Part of the reason why is they have allowed the 5th fewest receiving yards to the running back position, and they have only allowed 1 passing touchdown to the running back position so far this year. That's going to put Austin Ekeler in a tough position, given the fact that a lot of his production from this past week was in the passing game. And because Kansas City does such a good job of stuffing up the middle of that defense, Austin Ekeler could be in for a little bit of a lower ceiling performance. Now, we've been waiting for Austin Ekeler to come back, so there's no way in the world that we're even considering sitting him this week. But if you're hoping for top 5 potential, I just don't think Austin Ekeler will have that. Now on the complete flip side of all of this, the Los Angeles Chargers allow the 8th fewest rushing yards right now, but they allow the 7th most fantasy points to the running back position. And that's because they're polar opposites of Kansas City. They allow a lot of work to the running back position through the air. Even though they haven't allowed a receiving touchdown to the running back position, they have allowed the 5th most receptions to the running backs and 4th most receiving yards to running backs. Isaiah Pacheco right now is clocking in at just over 80% of the running back shares. And even if you would think that those numbers in terms of passing would lead to Jerick McKinnon getting a little bit more, Isaiah Pacheco is just on the field way too much. And that's why he's a safe start. Even if it is a tough matchup on the ground and maybe he doesn't see as many rushing yards as we would like, he's still going to make a little bit of an impact in the passing game. And given how much he is on the field, it's really hard to sit any running back or even consider sitting any running back, seeing 80% of their offensive snaps. Raheem Mostert turned in another huge top 5 performance this past week, but this matchup going up against Philadelphia may not allow that again. Philadelphia has currently allowed the 2nd fewest rushing yards and the 4th fewest fantasy points to the running back position, which may lead you to say, Kyle, why would Raheem Mostert be in green if this is such a tough matchup? Well, number one, we know he's going to get the touches, right? There's no way Salvon Ahmed or Jeff Wilson are going to come in and take enough touches away that we would even consider moving Raheem Mostert to the bench. So number one would be volume, but number two is this Dolphins' big playability. They can really score from anywhere on the field. So while Philadelphia may do a decent job of bottling up Raheem Mostert for a majority of the game, it takes one 60-yard touchdown to make his fantasy day. And that's really why I'm still going to consider listing him in green, because his upside is still there for how he can score from anywhere on the field, even if his floor completely bottoms out in this matchup. Now, DeAndre Swift has seen a pretty large step back over the last couple of weeks in terms of his rushing yards on the ground. His first couple of starts on the season, well over 100 yards, and since then hasn't really been able to get there. However, this past week, he saw a pretty big target share increase in the passing game, which is really huge for his fantasy upside. DeAndre Swift saw 9 targets, which was second on the team behind team leaders, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, who each had 10, which is really good to see for DeAndre Swift because, as I mentioned, his production on the ground hasn't been great the last couple of weeks. But if he's starting to see that type of a target share increase, it brings a really nice floor to an also really nice ceiling. All right, now the guy that everybody is going to have their eye on all week long, San Francisco and Minnesota, unfortunately, on Monday Night Football. And because of that, this is going to be a really tough week if you own Christian McCaffrey. If he ends up being a game time decision, you better have Jordan Mason on your bench. If you don't, you're very likely going to be screwed. Because here's the thing, if you own Christian McCaffrey and he's questionable all week and you don't know if he's gonna play on Monday Night Football, which as of this recording, we have no idea yet, you're going to put yourself in a position where you need to make the call. Are you expecting me to tell you to sit the #1 running back in football? This is an impossible type of situation that we all find ourselves in. You're really just going to have to sit back and say, man, I've got to get Jordan Mason. If I don't have Jordan Mason, I got to try and get Elijah Mitchell. If I don't have Elijah Mitchell, then I'm either going to need to suck it up and play someone over Christian McCaffrey. And if he plays, oh well. Or you're going to have to wait and see what happens. And if you try to start Christian McCaffrey and he doesn't play, you're taking a 0. You need to play it safe here. If I'm giving you what I would do in my situation, shoot for Elijah Mitchell, shoot for Jordan Mason. Jordan Mason, #1. If he doesn't play, if Christian McCaffrey's out, then you got Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell to toss in. If you don't get either of those guys and you have somebody else that you can throw in that has a pulse, I would go with that. If not, let's just risk it for the biscuit. And San Francisco, who allows the 6th fewest rushing yards to the running back position right now, makes Alexander Mattison a huge risk this week because he has a very, very low ceiling. This is going to be a game where more than likely Kirk Cousins is going to throw the ball 35 or 40 times, which is only going to give you maybe 10 or 15 carries from Alexander Mattison. If he doesn't rip off a big play or two, you're looking at a guy that could average well under 4 yards per carry this week, which is definitely going to give you well below 5 fantasy points. Yo, there you have it, Headliner Nation. This was a lot of information this week. A lot of injuries, a lot of buys. The running back position is really tough to navigate this week. So hopefully this analysis for every matchup of week 7 was able to get you on the right track. And don't forget to show up for our rankings episode on Thursday to give you a better idea of where some of these guys are going to end up finishing and who you should start over each other. I'm going to get out of here though, Headliner Nation. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.